This is Special Prosecutor Larry Cliven.
I'm the only lawyer ever to obtain a court ruling that a president of the United States committed a crime.
For truth. For competition.
As a young lawyer, I helped break up AT&T. That's why you have all your cell phones today.
For sovereignty. For the Republic.
I'm the guy who at Judicial Watch, which I founded, uncovered the Chinagate scandal. Millions of dollars going to the Clinton campaign, corrupting our political system.
For the privacy of citizens.
And I'm the only guy to have enjoined the National Security Agency from mass surveillance on hundreds of millions of Americans.
Tearing it up.
I'm the son of meatpackers in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I know how to slice and dice.
Bringing it back.
We're going to take this country apart and put it back together again in the way envisioned by our founding fathers.
It's not just talk.
We're not just regurgitating news stories. Larry Cliven, special prosecutor, is making the news.
And now, here's Larry.
Welcome to this edition of Special Prosecutor with Larry Cliven. We have a lot to talk about today. This is a very special show, perhaps our most special show, because I'm going to have on the line with us today our valiant client, Cliven Bundy, who I've talked about many times, and his son, Ryan Bundy. They were both defendants in a case that just was dismissed in the U.S. District Court for the District of Las Vegas, a criminal prosecution. You know all about it. We're going to go through it again because now we actually have them here. They've been in prison for almost 2 years. Ryan was just released really to a type of a halfway house under conditions, but now they're completely free because the judge on the case, Judge Navarro, was forced to declare that the indictment was invalid. She threw it out on the grounds of prosecutorial misconduct and on the grounds of misconduct by the federal government, including the FBI and the Bureau of Land Management. You know the story here. You know that the Bundys have ranched the land in Bunkerville for nearly 150 years. It was Cliven's great-grandfather, Mr. Levitt, who actually started the ranching on the farm. And they acquired over that period of time grazing rights and water rights. And they basically have the sole use and possession of that land. And that land does not belong to the federal government. It belongs to the state of Nevada. The federal government only held the land in trust for a very short period of time, but it inured to the state when the state of Nevada was created. The federal government claims to own 85% of that land, but that's false. They claim to own a lot of the land in Utah, in Arizona, and even California. They claim to own 38% of the land. Now ask yourself a question. How can you be a state if the federal government claims to own the land? But here's what happened in a nutshell, and I'm going to turn it over to Cliven and Ryan. They were both involved in this criminal prosecution. They were defendants. So were their other two sons, who have not yet been dismissed, but they will be dismissed shortly, Dave and Mel. And it was a persecution against the Bundy family. And it started with the Bureau of Land Management, who moved in to manage that land. And Cliven said, the patriarch of the family, I don't need you to manage the land. I'm doing a good job. I'm taking care of the land. This is my livelihood. This is my heritage. This is my life for me and my family. This is our homestead. And the Bureau of Land Management said, no, you must sign a contract, and we're going to charge you money to do that. And in doing that, they wanted to be able to regulate that land to such an extent with out-of-control environmental regulations that it would drive the Bundys out of business. In fact, hundreds of ranchers have been driven out of business already because of the way the Bureau of Land Management attempted to manage the land. I mean, it got to the point that they were protecting the turtle before they were protecting the Bundys and the cattle. And by doing that, they literally were telling the Bundy family where the cattle could eat, because Cliven and his family ranch on about 400,000 acres in and around Lake Mead. This is desert. It's hard to find food. And when the Bureau of Land Management tells you where your cattle can go and what bush they can eat at, it will drive you out of business. So you have to ask yourself the question, are you going to pay money to the federal government when the federal government, A, doesn't own the land, and B, if you were to adhere to what they said and pay for it, you'd be out of business. So this is the back story of this. And then there came to pass a senator from Nevada by the name of Harry Reid. And Harry Reid put into control at the Bureau of Land Management his own right-hand man, Neil Coren as former chief of staff. And what did Harry Reid also do? He recommended the appointment of the judge in this case, Judge Gloria Navarro, who was then nominated by President Obama and confirmed by a Democrat Senate. And lo and behold, when Obama came to power and Reid pressed Obama to send federal agents, and I wouldn't really call them agents, I would call them goons, I think that's a better word for it, mercenaries, into the ranch, the Bundys off the land. They threatened the Bundys' lives. They threw Cliven's sister Margaret to the ground violently. They attacked her. They had attacked his two sons. They kicked the family dog to the point where they could have killed the family dog. They killed the bulls in the herd and other cattle. The bulls are used to procreate, as you know. By the way, I come from a meatpacking family. It was pork, not cows, but I understand the way it works. You heard that in the introduction. And you can't raise a herd without the bulls. They buried them dead in a mass grave. And we now found out what exactly happened, because over the course of the last year, Judge Navarro, after the Bundys were arrested because they were alleged to have stood up to the government with the use of arms. They actually were never armed themselves, but when people around the country saw what was going on there, the physical abuse and attacks on the Bundy family, they came to wage a peaceful protest. And they came armed, and that's their right under the Second Amendment. Now, the people that came didn't threaten the federal agents. They didn't point guns at the federal agents. To the contrary, the federal agents pointed guns at them and wouldn't let them peacefully protest. But lo and behold, 2 years after the federal government was finally persuaded to leave, and they left eventually, and the cattle were free. They were trying to seize the cattle and put the Bundys out of business. In fact, there were even reports that Senator Harry Reid, through his son, was trying to negotiate the sale of the Bundys' land to third-party interests. Well, 2 years later, after Ryan and his brother Ammon went out to Oregon to try to protest for another rancher that was being driven out of business, and in that protest on a game reserve, one of the protesters was shot in cold blood, Leroy Finicum, and killed by an FBI agent. That was the trigger that the government needed, in quotes. And they arrested the Bundy brothers and others out there in Oregon. Cliven went out to visit his sons, and while he was at the airport, he was arrested in Oregon. And the federal government came down with indictments in both Oregon and in Nevada for about 18 defendants, including Cliven and his sons. And over the course of the next 2 years, the government failed to get convictions in Oregon against Ammon and Ryan. The jury saw through it. They saw that it was a complete charade. But the cases continued on in Las Vegas, Nevada, in front of Judge Gloria Navarro. And what happened initially? Cliven was thrown in solitary confinement. Speedy trial rights were overridden and denied based upon false representations of the Obama Justice Department that they needed to try all the defendants at once, and it was a complex case. The Bundys were not allowed out on bail, though they had been found to have done nothing wrong by anyone, and they spent virtually the next 2 years in prison. And then the government divided up the trial of the case so that Cliven and his sons Ammon and Ryan were tried after a first batch of defendants who they thought they would be easy to convict because they had pictures of them. Well, there's nothing, okay, if you think you're going to get hurt. And they thought that. Anyway, they really didn't succeed in that first trial. And finally, Cliven, Ryan, and Ammon, and another defendant, Ryan Payne, who also came to the aid of the Bundys, up for trial. And that's been going on for the last several months. And what did we learn in the course of that trial? We learned that FBI agent took the stand and lied under oath. We learned that the BLM had an agent as well take the stand, lie under oath. We learned that the prosecutors, led by Acting U.S. Attorney Stephen Myray, the number 2 in command, Dan Sheese, and a third, whose name, Miss Ahmad, I always forget her first name, that they lied to the judge. It came out in the course of the early testimony that documents that were exculpatory, that could go to show that the Bundys had committed no crime, were shredded and destroyed. It turned out that there was surveillance on the Bundy ranch before any of the so-called standoff occurred, and that the video of that could have also served to aid the defense, showing carrying weapons that they were not a threat. Threat assessments were suppressed, showing that the government knew, our so-called government knew, that the Bundys were not a threat. And later, a whistleblower came forward in the course of the case, and the whistleblower from the BLM was prepared to testify that there was severe prejudice against Mormons and their faith, which is a very fine faith. I've gotten to know it much more about the faith, in the last 2 years, and it's a fine religion. And a lot of other things. There was a kill list for Cliven and his sons. There were targets hanging on the wall. Unbelievable. Perhaps the worst abuse of federal law enforcement in the nation's history since King George III did the same kinds of things to the colonialists in the years leading up to the Declaration of Independence. The Bundys have valiantly fought in court what is in effect a second American Revolution. And that's what drew me to them in the beginning. I've now known them for 4 years. They're the finest, if not the finest group of people I have ever met. They believe in the Constitution. The Constitution is incorporated in effect into the Book of Mormon. They believe that the United States is the promised land, and they love Israel too. They're a lost tribe of Israel. These are true heroes, and the conviction of these people is unbelievable. I'm going to tell you a little more when we come in after the break, and then I'm going to turn it over to Cliven and Ryan to tell their story, because they're extremely articulate, they're very bright, and they'll lay it out for you right from the horse's mouth, or should I say right from the cow's mouth, no pun intended. We'll be right back with Special Prosecutor with Larry Cliven.
Dangerous.
Don't care. Use the court and the law.
Lethal.
This is bad.
Special Prosecutor
Very bad.
Larry Cliven.
If you'd like to support Freedom Watch and this radio show, go to freedomwatchusa.org.
Right back to this special edition, in effect, of Special Prosecutor with Larry Cliven, because I'm extremely honored to have my clients on the phone right now, Cliven and Ryan Bundy. But I want to say one thing here. What the Bundys experienced with the Department of Justice, and going back a year, I've been urging the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, who I've spoken with on the phone and communicated with him to review this case. He finally agreed to do so right before Judge Navarro dismissed the indictment with prejudice, and we're seeking to work with him to obtain justice, because it's not done yet. Already environmental groups are urging the BLM to come back onto the Bundy Ranch and try to seize their cattle and put them out of business. Crazy, wild leftist environmental groups. And then you've got others out there on the left that wish us no good. And we have to obviously assert our rights to the land, which is owned by the state of Nevada. Yesterday, or 2 days ago, there was a press conference in front of the sheriff's office in Clark County, Sheriff Lombardo. And Cliven made the point that the sheriff needs to protect him should the federal government try to do the same thing again. But under President Trump, that's very unlikely. In fact, during the presidential campaign, President Trump spoke sympathetically of the plight of the Bundys and of ranchers in the West. And he also denationalized certain portions of Utah that were nationalized by Obama right as he was leaving office. In fact, Cliven's land was basically taken in whole part illegally by Obama on his way out the door in 2016. And they created a gold butane national monument. So these issues are out there, but there's also a big issue here. The way President Trump has been treated by the FBI and by the Justice Department with this phony investigation of Russian collusion, with illegal wiretaps, with special counsels and everything else that were appointed, he can understand what happened to the Bundys, because the same thing's happening to him. And this is a big problem in this country. We're talking about tyranny by the federal government with the misuse of the Justice Department. I use that term loosely, and I'm in a department. I was a prosecutor myself, and frankly, I'm disgusted at my alma mater, of which I was once proud. So we have to bring about justice here. Our job is not done, and we need the support of the American people, and the wind is at our back. But when Cliven left prison the other day, I saw him in the lobby as he was released. Everybody was tearing over with the happiness, but Cliven left as if he hadn't even been in prison for the last 2 years. I had visited him about 25 times. We've spent a lot of time together. You know, it's not easy to be in prison. The food's not good. It's tough conditions. And he came out, and he came out as a fighter. And the first thing he said is he thanks our Heavenly Father. And then we went outside, and it was raining. And he said, you know, this is a good omen because ranchers need rain, particularly on arid deserts where our cattle ranches. We know that God has given us a covenant here. And that is so moving. And everybody was literally in tears, including Cliven was tearing over. So I want to introduce you proudly to my client, Cliven Bundy, and Ryan, who I also helped. Ryan, by the way, represented himself in the trial. He was brilliant. He was better than any other lawyer. He's got a natural ability. I told him I think he should go to law school after this whole thing's over. But I just want you to introduce yourself, guys, and then we're going to come back on a very long segment. Cliven?
Larry, thank you for inviting us on here. America, I greet you. I'm happy to be able to talk to you. And this big wide world, I'm proud to be part of that. And I know there's lots of good people out there. In fact, I know that each of you are good. And I appreciate having the opportunity to talk to you. I'm thankful I feel free this morning. The sun's shining on the ranch. The ground's wet from a nice rain. Cowboys are out checking the cattle. The fields look like they're going to start growing this spring, and things are going to be good. So it's good to be home. It's good to be home with my wife and my children and grandchildren. We've had a great reunion. Lots of love in the Bundy family here on the Bundy Ranch.
All right. Well, hello. This is Ryan Bundy. Hey, I'm glad to be with you today. Always glad to speak with people about freedom, about the proper form of government. And hey, I'm always learning, and I'm always teaching. And I'll share with whatever I learn. And I've learned a lot of things over the past 2 years. I've learned a lot of things over the past 25 years concerning this issue and the importance of our liberty.
And we're going to talk about that. We'll be right back. Ryan, hold on there, because we're going to lay it out.
And now, 4 words that make corrupt politicians make wee-wee in their little pants.
Transparency and the rule of law will be the touchstones of this presidency.
But we have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it.
Special Prosecutor Larry Claman.
Be the one who makes our country great again. Go to freedomwatchusa.org and donate.
We're back with Special Prosecutor with Larry Claman. Ryan, you wanted to finish that thought, and then I want to turn it over to Cliven to explain the history of your family on that and why the land is not owned by the federal government, but by the state of Nevada, the people of Nevada, really. And then I want your thoughts, Ryan, as well, on how this trial went, because you were instrumental. You were representing yourself there, and you weren't afraid of this Judge Navarro. Every other lawyer in this case was very gingerly with her because they get court appointments and stuff like that. But you laid it out on the line, and you really did a great job. So, Cliven, tell us about the history of your family on that land and why the land is not owned by the federal government but by the people of Nevada.
Well, I'd like to give you a little history on my family. We got to go back, my grandpa and great-grandpa and even great-great-grandpa, they were some of the very first pioneers to come west. And, of course, they come into the Salt Lake Valley in Salt Lake, Utah, There was the territory. It wasn't even the territory of Utah. At that time, it belonged to the country of Mexico. And then it became a territory of Utah. But as they come down into the southern part of Nevada, there was no roads or even a trail. The only white people that had been through this country was the Spaniard. They had a Spaniard trail across this area. But there was no roads, no place for a wagon to travel. And they come here and they broke the roads and started to create a home here. Now, my rights, and we're talking about personal property rights. We're talking about rights like the rights to for livestock water. We're talking about the rights to graze cattle, use the forage. We're talking about the rights to have access to this land. We're talking about rights to make range improvements like water troughs and tanks and corrals and fences. These rights were all created through preemptive rights created through beneficial use. And now as my grandfathers came into the country, they had their family in a covered wagon with a horse team in front and maybe a milk cow behind. Everything they owned was on the wagon. No roads, no trails, just working their way through the rough desert, and they find a place they feel like they can stop and camp. And so what do they need most? They need to, what does their horse need? Well, mainly they need a drink of water at this point. So they unbuckle their horse from the wagon, their harness, and they take the horse up to either a little creek or a spring. And the moment, the first drop of water that horse drinks is starting to make beneficial use of a renewable resource. And that's where rights begin. The beneficial use creates the first right. And the first right is protected by Nevada law. And then, of course, that horse needs something to eat. Well, they didn't have a bale of hay or grain in that wagon, so the horse started to nibble on the brush and the forage and the grass. And when he took the first nibble, he started to make a beneficial use of a renewable resource. And that is protected also by Nevada law. And so that's where it all begins. From that point on, they used the resources. Other pioneers came into the country and they used the resources, and they made beneficial use, making it a good, producing a product, a commodity. They've taken this southwest desert and harvesting the forage off from it, using what little water was here, and they started to create a product that's called beef. And beef is good to eat. That's what our hamburger and steaks made out of. That's good food. That's steaks. That's what's for dinner. And so that's sort of where our rights begin. And we've been able to continue to use it and make beneficial use and make a commodity good for man for now 150 years.
And Cliven, tell the audience briefly why the federal government does not own the land and the people of Nevada own.
Be happy to tell you. Now I'm talking about we've created rights, beneficial use. Now let's talk a little bit about our Constitution. You know, in our Constitution, it says that the federal government cannot own land. Not own no land. There's nothing in the Constitution that allows the federal government to own land except for in one way. Let me back up. To own land within admitted states, there's nothing in the Constitution that can say that the federal government can own land within a admitted state. But they are one article. Article 1, 8, and 17 allows the federal government to buy land for certain purposes from the state. And those purposes are for mostly military purposes. Other purposes would be for like a post office or a court house. We called other buildings. Now, that's the only thing in our Constitution, which is the supreme law of the land, that allows the federal government to own property within a admitted state. And not only the question could be, well, if the United States owns all of this land, why would they have to buy this land from an admitted state like the state of Nevada? And the other question would be, how could the state of Nevada possibly sell land if they didn't own it? So how could they sell land in the United States if they didn't own it? You know, that's very simple thinking, but that's what the Constitution lays out for us. The federal government cannot own land. They can only buy land from an admitted state. An admitted state would have to own that land to sell it to federal government, and it can only be used for certain reasons, purposes, and mainly that would be for military and things like post offices and the courthouses. And let me explain it just a little bit further.
Okay.
In the Constitution, Article 4, it says that the Congress has a power to dispose of and dispose of. Let's stop and think. Dispose of, what does that mean? It means they have power to dispose of what? The territory that the United States claims they have some ownership of. So the Constitution says they can dispose of that territory. And I think most people forget that Congress has disposed of most all of America. Land has been disposed of and made admitted states. And when they do that, Congress loses their congressional power. And who has that power? Well, the 10th Amendment of the Constitution says that power belongs to the state of the state or its people. The government has no power here, and that's why in Nevada on Bundy Ranch land, I say this United States don't have no business here. I'm saying this court has no jurisdiction or authority. They do not. I want to let you talk about my 15-second defense. Cliven Bundy's 15-second defense in this federal court is, I graze my cattle only on Clark County, Nevada land, and I have no contract with the federal government. So I'm not a party with the federal government. They do not own the land. This court has no jurisdiction or authority over me. So they have imprisoned me and used me as a political prisoner for right at 700 days. And, you know, I'm tired of that. And I don't want to see American people being treated this way anymore. My sons were in there away from their family and their little children. And I don't think America should put up with this. And, you know, we go back 4 years ago, we had America, you know, when I'm saying America, we have the United States government pointing guns at we the people, pointing those guns down our throat and then threatening to pull the triggers. You know, we the people are not going to put up with that. And we have asked our county sheriffs who have the policing power, the authority over this land in this area. These county sheriffs have more policing power, more arresting power, more constitutional authority than even the President of the United States in these particular counties, in any county in America. And we need to pay attention to that and honor them. And we asked those sheriffs across this United States to disarm these bureaucrats. These bureaucrats should not have armies, and they do have them right now.
What you've experienced and what Ryan experienced, what Ammon and Mel and Dave experienced are exactly what the colonialists experienced from a tyrannical king before we fought the revolution. You were fighting for the principles of our founding fathers. We fought the law, in quotes. Of course, they weren't really the law. They were lawless violators, even though they claimed to be federal agents. And we won, like the famous song, we won. And now we have to solidify our hold on that. And you're an example of freedom for the entire country, because you cannot have people in Washington, D.C. dictating how you're going to ranch the land. You're the last man standing in terms of a ranch of any size in Nevada. They drove them all out of business. I want to turn it over right now to Ryan. He understood what the federal government did at trial. He did a great job The original mistrial was declared a few weeks ago before the indictment was dismissed just last Monday. The jurors were polled, and they would have acquitted. Tell us what the federal government did at trial. It wasn't just the violence that they caused in threatening your lives. Tell us about that.
Sure. Before I get going on that, I want to make a few corrections. First of all, we're not the last rancher standing in the state of Nevada, just simply in Clark County, Nevada. And second of all, I acted as sui juris, not pro se, in the court. And so now back to your question. You were saying that restate your question there, would you, for me, Larry?
Yeah. By the way, I meant that you were the last rancher of any size. Okay, so that's what I'm saying. Last question is, I want you to tell the listeners, and we have 2 minutes left on this segment, what happened at the trial that caused Judge Navarro to dismiss the indictment with prejudice.
Well, what really happened is the truth that we have been trying to say for the past 2 years finally came out in a way that the judge simply could not deny any longer. The government had been acting in manners where they were hiding information, preventing defense from calling in witnesses in the previous trials, withholding evidence that would have exonerated us and or the other defendants. And we were able to point our finger at it and expose it in a way that the judge simply couldn't deny it any longer. And so she had to dismiss it because the law just would not allow it to go on because of the misconduct of the government prosecutors.
Ryan, hold on. We'll pick this up. We'll be right back with Special Prosecutor with Larry Cliven.
Lord Acton was right. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. And as Ronald Reagan said, government isn't the solution to our problems, government is the problem. Whether it's the power of our corrupt elected officials, corrupt unelected bureaucrats, or corrupt local, state, and federal judges, Freedom Watch stands for you. We fight the battles for you. We are your Justice Department. We are small, but like a mouse that roars, we are fierce. We won some of the biggest cases against government overreach and corruption, like the 2013 case against the CIA NSA data collection of every American. We have lawsuits against Berkeley, the Federal Bureau of Land Management, and Black Lives Matter. We need your help in our fight for your freedom. Join the battle and donate to Freedom Watch right now. Call 1-844-FW-ETHIC or go to www.freedomwatchusa.org and donate generously to our cause.
Before he was a trial lawyer, he sliced him and diced him.
People used to ask me, Larry, what caused you to start Judicial Watch and now Freedom Watch, given the powerful forces in this country that put you at risk?
In a meat packing plant.
I'm the son of meat packers in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I know how to slice and dice.
A very special prosecutor, Larry Cliven.
If you'd like to support Freedom Watch and this radio show, go to freedomwatchusa.org.
We're back with Special Prosecutor with Larry Cliven. Ryan, you wanted to finish that thought. Lay it out for us, because you were there on the front line.
Okay, well, going into trial, and I do want people to realize that they had previously tried other defendants in 2 other trials. And in those previous trials, they were not able to get good, clean convictions against our men because, well, first of all, we're just not guilty of the crimes. But those previous trials, the government had put in motions of limine, which limit the range of discussion, range of testimony that can be brought in. They blocked witnesses from the defense. They blocked, testimony. They blocked a lot of evidence. And what they're trying to do is basically narrow the scope of discussion so that that the full truth cannot be put before the jury. In our trial that started, they didn't put in such a motion of limine, but they went about trying to hide evidence that is considered exculpatory. In other words, it's evidence that would exonerate us and show our innocence. And they were trying to prevent that from coming into the case and before the jury. There was a whole bunch of evidence that was not put into discovery that we had never seen, and yet we still knew that some of this stuff would have been available. Going through the discovery, we can find little clips of this or that were taking place, but could never get a full picture of what was really going on because of these pieces of evidence that was being withheld. And so we started to try to bring this to light, and we caught the government in, red-handed, lies numerous times and in front of the judge. And the judge recognized these lies. She was able to see that the government was, in fact, lying and trying to prevent this information coming forth. That type of behavior is called Brady and Giglio information. Now, those are names of previous court cases that have set precedents stating that the government must reveal all that type of information. And so, it would have been, deceitful for the government to act that way without these precedents. But now these precedents set it forth that they have to do these things. They have to reveal these things, and they didn't. And so because of those Brady and Giglio violations, the judge had no alternative but to dismiss the case with prejudice because of the misconduct of the government.
And also she did it with prejudice rather than going back to allow the government to retry it, because the government learned all of our strategy, a lot of our... But as Cliven pointed out at the press conference the other day, we would have won if this thing went to a jury.
When the judge did actually dismiss with prejudice, or actually it was before that, when she declared a mistrial on December 20th, she dismissed the jury. So the jury left the courtroom, went back into their room where they meet, and then afterwards we heard that they requested to come back in to be able to meet us. And so all the jury members came back into the courtroom. Now the court is no longer in session, so we're just mingling around in there. And the juries came in, they hugged us, they told us what they were thinking. We visited with them for 20, 30 minutes after that. And they wanted to get our phone numbers, they wanted to come visit the ranch. They were just all kinds of friendly with us and showing forth their position. Later, on January 8th, which was the hearing and the time that the judge declared a dismissal with prejudice, 8 of the 12 jury members came to be in the gallery, part of the public. And again, they expressed their gratitude of being part of this case, and they had said, well, we wished we would have been able to make the decision and do our job as a jury. They wanted to put forth their word and show that they believed us and that the government was out of line.
What Ryan's saying tells you that the jury system is sacrosanct in this country. They are the people that protect the American people, not the judges, but the jurors. Incidentally, I've never lost a jury trial. I have a great faith in the jury system. And the Bundys are valiant, patriotic people. We, the rest of the American people, owe them a great debt of gratitude. We'll be back again next week, and the Bundys will be on again, and we'll continue this story. Until then, thank you for listening.